Want Washington to get to work, but Washington is sick. They're weighted down with all of this, and it's become very ineffective, and all they do is bloviate on and on about this stuff every day, and it's wasting our taxpayer dollars. So you're right. Yeah. They don't want normal. Normal didn't get them anywhere. That's why Donald Trump was ushered in with this election to change and shake things up.
Well, but what do you think? Can you see anything that's going to change it? It's just going to go on like this. I
think, we'll see if Mueller comes to some kind of, conclusion relatively quickly. I hope he does, for the sake of the country and for the goodwill of everybody, because this obsession is so unhealthy. Yeah. It is so counterproductive to everything that we're supposed to stand for and trying to move forward in this country. We have a lot of problems that appear to be intractable because people aren't working on them. They're focusing on this type of obsession of Russia.
A great summary. I think actually that word unproductive, I think people can agree with that, whatever side you come from on it. Lucy, just from your point of view, from the left, do you think there's anyone in the Democrats or just on the left generally who's handling this right, who's really speaking up for working people? Who's out there doing that?
I think in general, D.C. has always had a problem walking and chewing gum at the same time. We just are focused on the one thing. I think for a long time Democrats did it because they had to take away the attention from what had happened over the course of the election, et cetera, and it was just a way to keep that ongoing. Now it is literally just really a problem that exists with all sides and just D.C. in general. I mean, the American people should be hearing about what's happening to the health care debate right now, and the fact that so many people are about to lose necessary and critical health care services for them, and yet here we are going on and on. So the answer to your question, who's going to take it, I think it's us. Right. I think it's this show. I think it's those of us who continue to try to be forceful and aggressive in having these conversations for the American people, and to try to get folks to really
focus on what matters in real life.
That's right.
I think, well, thank you. I mean, Joe, this isn't just limited to Democrats. I mean, you've got conservatives, people on the right, who are actually caught up in this this focus on something that doesn't affect real life as well. What do you?
It's so many different cases.
Do you agree with that? Which side of it are you on? Are you obsessed about Russia, or do you think it's ridiculous?
I think there's probably not much there. Right? I mean, I don't
want to talk about the actual details. No, please spare us that.
It's almost as though, well, there aren't that many details to speak of. Right. I mean, it's almost as though the federal government has gotten so large, and the right and the left have arrogated so much power and so much money, 22% of GDP is spent by the federal government, right, that they don't really know how to handle it. And so it's quite a lot easier, actually, to focus on a pretty fun, mysterious Grisham novel than it is to actually try to solve large problems.
I really agree. Funny enough, that thought is what lies behind what I've been talking about in terms of decadent DC. The reason I use that word decadent is that's what it feels like to me. They're all rich, they're all comfortable doing their thing. It's so much easier to get into this stuff than the really hard things, like fixing healthcare or getting the economy going. Well, I mean, why can't? It's so frustrating.
It's frustrating, but if you see the polls too, and here's a big problem, I think. You talked about both parties. There's Republicans that become obsessed about it, quite critical and focusing on it. The Democrats as well. But if you look at some of the shift, and like you talked about, and you really talk about a lot on your show about this populism and positive populism. That's what people want. They want to get things going, get the economy going. And the problem with the Democrats, you see, and the liberals, are they've actually lost sway with the working men and women, the working class and the middle class, that got frustrated and gravitated over towards Donald Trump for the very reasons that you're espousing, that we need to focus on things that actually matter, and not this like bizarre KGB spy novel stuff that people seem to be obsessed with, that is just salacious and decadent and not productive.
Yeah, I agree with that. But Lucy, on that side, I mean, I think that Kimberly makes a really good point there in terms of what how the Democrats lost touch with the working class. But the one person who didn't was Bernie Sanders, and you supported him.
Right.
I think it's really interesting what's going on with him right now. It seems to me that, I mean, there's a lot of people attacking him, his wife. There's all this kind of stuff about land deals, and they're trying to tarnish him. There's a story in the New York Times today. What's going on with Bernie Sanders right now?
When we talk about decadent DC, one of the things that we used to say and still say often is that Bernie can't be bought. Bernie essentially crowdfunded the majority of his campaign. He raised hundreds of millions of dollars from everyday people giving small amounts of money. I mean, we're all familiar with the $27.
Right.
And that's the kind of people, and that's why at the same time people gravitated to someone like Donald Trump, because they did feel like these folks were these outsiders, and there still is that tendency to want people who are not going to be have some kind of loyalty to this insider lobbyist class that are writing these big checks, the donor class, etc. So yes, that's what people want. They do want this outsider. However, I do have to say that in terms of what Donald Trump has done to bring real change to D.C., I haven't seen it there either.
No, I actually really agree with that. I said at the very first time I was on the show, I said we're going to hold him to account as well,
and
because he got elected to do something.
I'm not interested, frankly, in turning this into a Republican versus a Democratic thing, right? Like these conversations always need to be about who are those people. If it were Donald Trump, I would be like, fantastic. I'm not that party, but he is definitely draining that swamp. And if it's going to be Bernie Sanders or if it's somebody else, but the point is that I think that the American people want that outsider perspective, that person who's not obligated to this insider, decadent D.C. class.
And I think that's why it's not just about the White House, it's also about who is in Congress. That's why last week we had Zach Exley on, who wants to basically kick out all the members of Congress and replace them with more populists of the left and right. So that there's an agenda there. Joe, I just want to leave it with you. What do you make of this? Is your sympathy with the outsiders who are trying to storm the barricades?
Yeah, in general, yes. I mean, we're supposed to have a federal government that is highly responsive to the people's needs, but it's supposed to be filtered through people who are elected, not directly to represent, but to actively think of, conceive of the policies that are going to advance people's interests. And they're just not doing that. In fact, if anything, they're probably too directly responsible to the people who helped elect them 3 months earlier. And they can't look 6 months. Well, I mean, we have such a curtailed election cycle now, right? And so someone gets into the House, they're running for re-election 6 months later, and there's just so little.
No, I know, it's a terrible problem. The money is at the heart of it.
And it's more self-interest operates instead of the interests of the people that elected them.
Well, talking of money, there are mind-boggling amounts of money made by hospitals and the people running them, and that is tonight's Swamp Watch, which is still ahead. And next, an interview that no parent should miss. Education reform in America. How can we beat powerful teacher unions who put their interests ahead of your children's? One man who did it in one of the country's biggest cities is here. And later, we're grilling up some revolutionary food right here in our parking lot. And Kimberly will try it out in a special edition of Kimberly's Food Court later in the show. As we've discussed on this show before, the technology revolution is changing the workplace really fast. The best thing we can do to help our children prepare for that is to make sure our schools innovate too. Now, typically, teachers' unions stand in the way of that. But here in Los Angeles, former Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa was able to break the stranglehold teachers' unions had on the city. Mayor Villaraigosa, who's now running as a Democratic candidate for California governor, is here with me live to talk about how he did it and how it might happen nationwide. I'm so pleased you could join us, because to me this issue of school reform is so fundamental, and often it's a left-right thing. But you showed it doesn't need to be. Just tell us, when you were mayor of Los Angeles, what you did and why you did it.
Well, I've said, first of all, it's the democracy issue of our time, the economic issue of our time, and the civil rights issue of our time, particularly when you look at who's not getting educated. They're primarily poor, kids of color. When I became mayor, we had a 44% graduation rate. I said, this isn't sustainable. I took it on. I didn't take it on for the purpose of taking on the teachers union or any of the other bureaucrats involved in the education. I wanted to fight for kids, and I did. When we started out, we said we're going to set high standards. We're going to say to our kids, I believe in you. We're going to invest in you. We moved our graduation rate from 44% to 72%. It's now at 77%. I took on a subset of schools in Watts and on the east side, in the poorest parts of the city. They had a 36% graduation rate. They now have an 84%.
And what was it that, when you say took it on, what did you try and do? What was the actual change that you wanted to make? What was the reform?
Well, I got the state to give the mayor the opportunity to partner with the school district. When we passed that, Arnold Schwarzenegger signed it, and a Democratic legislature passed it. The school district sued and fought, and so what we did was we decided to elect a school board that was supportive of our efforts to improve our schools and to put kids first. And that's kind of what helped to create a situation where we doubled the number of successful schools at 800 and above when they were measuring schools, and increased the graduation rate in the way
So you
they
thought
said.
the system itself wasn't going to deliver the results you needed, and you had to do something.
It was clear they weren't.
Right.
You know, the high school that I had graduated from had a 25% graduation rate in 1971. When I became mayor in 2005, they had improved to a 35% graduation rate. As I said, they're now reversed it.
Right. But I was interested, because you actually at one point were an organizer for the teachers' unions, weren't you?
I was an organizer for the teachers' union.
But I was interested that you once called the United Teachers Union in Los Angeles the one unwavering roadblock to improving public education. What did they make of that?
Well, they didn't like it. And I'm pro-union,
right,
and pro-teacher.
Right.
They have a tough job.
Right.
But I'm pro-kid. And as I said many times, I believe in unions. I think parents ought to have one. And I think kids don't have one, and so I was going to fight for them. And that's what we did. And we're going to have to do the same. You know, you talked about the innovation economy.
Yeah.
We won't have one if these kids aren't graduating from high school. Currently in the state, about an 80% graduation rate. About 13% of the 61% of kids who are of color are going to four-year colleges. That's not a recipe for success going into the future. So the next governor is going to have to set high standards. Next governor is going to have to bring technology into our classrooms, rethink what schools look like. We pattern our schools, including the school year, after an agrarian economy.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense anymore.
I so agree with that. I mean, I've talked about it too in the terms, they're like factory schools, right? They're literally churning out kids as if they're sort of on a production line. But often
But they're not doing it well.
Not doing it well, exactly. But it's often the institutions, you know, the existing school boards and the unions and the people who are sort of invested in the status quo that stand in the way of the change. And you took that on. I was just interested what that felt like. Did you, for you as a politician from the left, what did it feel like?
Again, I wasn't looking for a fight.
But you got one.
But I grew up in a tough neighborhood.
Right.
And I wasn't afraid of a fight. Initially, I tried to partner and did for a couple of years. But when there was just opposition after opposition to almost anything that was new, we started to push back.
Well, I think that's great. I really that's the kind of leadership I think you got to see. Otherwise, this is all just going to stay the same and nothing's going to improve. So
well, like you said, this isn't left or right. This is actually the right thing to do for kids who, without that kind of advocacy, we're just not making enough progress.
Totally agree. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
It's good to be on
coming
show.
along. Thank you so much. Definitely, definitely. And next, the panel joins us to talk about the same topic, the state of our country's education system and what we can do about it. And later, of course, hospitals are places of healing. But did you know they're also leading contributors to our nation's swampy politics? A hard-hitting swamp watch you won't want to miss later in the show. The Next Revolution is coming right back. Welcome back to The Next Revolution. We've heard from former Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, and now he and I are joined by our panel, Kimberly Guilfoyle, Joe Malchow, and Lucy Flores. Lucy, I wanted to really let the two of you compare notes, because you actually had a very similar experience, didn't you, in terms of the teachings. Tell us about your
I actually,
story.
So again, very much like Mayor Villaraigosa, I'm pro-kid. And to me, it's not that we don't need certain things in Nevada. We needed revenue for education, but the way that the Education Association of Nevada was going about it, I was against. And because I had the courage to say, I don't agree with this, I agree that we need to fund our education, we need to do X, Y, and Z for these kids, but I don't agree that this is the way, I ended up losing that support and I did not get it back. Right. And that absolutely affected my next campaign. And so in many ways, those of us who do oppose, who for the most part are our friends, but when we have to say in this situation, yes, we are still friends, but this is what's important, is what we're going to accomplish for these children.
Yeah.
It doesn't go very well for us,
right?
As we both have found out.
But I mean, it's what you were saying, isn't it? It shouldn't be a left-right thing.
It really shouldn't. And I've always said I prefer a partnership, and I think at some point people will realize that's the best way to go forward. But I'm going to fight for those kids, because I was one of them. I was a high school dropout. I grew up in a home of domestic violence and alcoholism. I was a kid struggling, and people gave up on me. But it was a public school that gave me a second chance. And I think we got to make sure that we're setting the highest standards for these kids. I tell people I can read and write. I grew up like many of them. We were making too many excuses before, and those excuses aren't acceptable. It's just a fact.
I think that's right. But I think, Joe, I mean, it isn't something that you can just fix from sort of on high by, some bureaucrat telling.
No, it takes a guy like Scott Walker or something.
You need changes, don't you, to the actual way that
this
schools
is
run, the structure of schools.
It's a structural problem, right? I mean, economists have studied this for decades. Sure, maybe you have unions in a car factory, some other sort of manufacturing company, but the idea of a public sector union where not only are they bargaining collectively to extract as much as they possibly can, but they're also hoping to elect their bosses, the people with whom they're bargaining. You're naturally going to get a lot of money coming out of the system into private pockets, and that's what's happening with the teachers' unions.
So, I mean, you're hoping to be governor of California. Well,
I expect to be going with
there you are.
People.
You're trying very hard. Just in terms of the debt and the fiscal position of California, the role of the public sector and the pensions, that's a really big issue for any politician running for office at the state level here.
It is,
and in many other states, right?
It is a big issue, and I have a track record. We were facing a bankruptcy. Almost everybody said LA was going bankrupt. I said not on my watch, and I got current employees to go from 6% to 11%, more than anybody in the state.
Sorry, 6% to 11% on
contribution to their. They were only paying 6% to their pensions.
Interesting.
And then I said new employees, instead of getting 100% of their salary at 55, would get 75 at 65. So it wasn't draconian.
Yeah.
It was fair. It honored work, but also created a more sustainable path going forward. Unfortunately, they changed that when I left, not for the current employees, but for new ones, and now it's back to where it was.
Interesting. Kimberly, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I have some very strong opinions about education. Having worked as a teacher, been an educator, I've taught everything from kindergarten through high school, specializing in children with special needs and emotional differences. And I just saw what a factory system, how poor it is in some of these public schools, where you have children just being treated not as individuals, but just as a collective group. And I think it's very important to bring education away from the national level with Common Core and things like that, because it's too prescriptive. It's not, one size fits all. And take it down to the state and local level, make it much more tailored for a child's specific need. I like the idea of following, the child with the dollars to make sure and give parents some of that choice. I've seen tremendous success with charter schools and parents being able to be participatory in it. So, and I'd like to see some reform in the state and federal laws as it relates to tenure. You should reward good teachers, and those that aren't doing the job should be eliminated.
This is something you did, wasn't it, here in Los Angeles, in terms of the performance and teachers?
Well, yes, we said that we thought it was important to evaluate our teachers. We had done surveys that showed oftentimes that a principal hadn't been in a classroom and yet would evaluate these people and oftentimes give them a satisfactory or better evaluation. And what we said was, you got to go into the classroom, and we should be able to evaluate on a number of factors, including where a kid starts and where they end up. Not the only factor, just one factor.
Steve, I want to quickly add that what I think is really critical here is that we talk about accountability across the board, because there are just as bad charters as there are just as bad public schools. And so what we need to be really clear here is that we need that accountability at all levels and be honest about where people are performing, whether it's public or private.
Right. I think that's a completely fair comment, and I think that actually if you had more of a marketplace with a level playing field, then you could get that. I'm sorry, it's such a massive topic. That's all we've got time for. I really appreciate you joining us tonight. Hope to see you soon. And still ahead, Kimberly and the panel taste test a special burger. Don't miss that. But next, Hospitals save lives but drain wallets. Swamp Watch sheds light on how Centers for Healing can also rip you off. Next. Tonight we continue our three-part Swamp Watch series on one of the issues we face, healthcare. It's America's biggest industry by far, the biggest expense for the average family, and, outrageously, an expense that increasingly cripples families. Medical bills have now become a factor in 62% of personal bankruptcies. In 1981, that number was only 8%. Clearly, something has gone very wrong. Last week, we explained how the big problem with healthcare in America, the reason for many of Obamacare's failures and the reason Republicans are having such problems reforming it, is that it all costs so much. We showed how the pharmaceutical industry and its corrupt stooges in Congress keep drug prices needlessly high. Tonight, we'll look at the role hospitals play in the health swamp triangle. Hospitals sound like wonderful, charitably minded institutions. In fact, most of them avoid paying taxes because they are charitable non-profits. But don't let that fool you. Today's hospitals make huge profits and pay their bosses huge salaries. The local hospital with your friendly doctor has been replaced by vast mega hospitals run by administrators on multi-million-dollar packages. Like Michael Dowling, a former government bureaucrat who in 2015 raked in $10 million as CEO of North Shore University Hospital on Long Island. $10 million a year? Let's all join a non-profit. So those insanely expensive hospital bills you get, they're not making wide-eyed, fresh out of med school doctors and nurses wealthy. They're enriching hospital administrators and CEOs. In fact, if you're a go-getting chief executive, healthcare and pharmaceuticals is truly the sector to be in. Exploiting sick people through vital but vastly overpriced services that might bankrupt them, it's really a great gig. Among the 200 highest paid executives at public companies, those in healthcare and pharmaceuticals were paid on average $37 million, more than any other sector. Telecommunications, real estate, industrial. Non-profit hospitals are cash cows for CEOs. A Wall Street Journal analysis found that the largest non-profit compensation package went to the CEO of non-profit hospital Ascension, Mr. Anthony Tassini. He made a cool $17.6 million. Now look, don't get me wrong, I have nothing against high pay. I believe in markets and I believe people who create value in the marketplace should be rewarded. But it's got to be fair, especially in something like healthcare, where there are vast amounts of taxpayer money sloshing around. And healthcare is not a fair market. It's a rigged market. The reason hospitals can pay their bosses so much is that they charge so much. They charge you, whether directly through your insurance or through your taxes, obscene amounts of money for medical services and supplies. Their prices are listed in what's called a charge master. The charge master price isn't based on anything objective like, cost. Even something as simple as a pack of gauze pads could cost the patient as much as $77. Amazon sells 400 of them for $15. Dear hospitals, if you want to save us all some money, you might want to check it out. It even comes with free 2-day shipping. But how do the new breed of mega hospitals get away with this kind of profiteering? Simple. Squeeze out the competition. Over the last few years, we've seen wave after wave of mergers in the hospital sector, with big brand name conglomerates like New York Presbyterian buying up networks of doctors and clinics to funnel patients their way. A study looking at hospital mergers found that they didn't improve quality of care and that, quote, hospital consolidation generally results in higher prices. When hospitals merge in already concentrated markets, the price increase can be dramatic, often exceeding 20%. And remember, these mega hospitals aren't just harming patients, they're also costing taxpayers more money, while making insiders, including corrupt politicians, super wealthy. Perhaps the most prominent is private healthcare executive turned politician Rick Scott. Yes, the very same Rick Scott who's now the Republican governor of Florida. He was once chairman of a hospital network, and while in that job, had the swampy distinction of presiding over the largest fraud settlement in U.S. history. In 2002, the Hospital Corporation of America, then known as Columbia HCA, paid a $1.7 billion settlement for fraudulently billing taxpayer-funded Medicare by inflating the seriousness of diagnoses and by filing false cost reports. Among other swampy practices, they admitted to giving doctors partnerships in their company hospitals as a kickback for those doctors referring patients to the HCA. And what was the quality of care like at Rick Scott's network of hospitals? According to the book Money-Driven Medicine, not good. Scott was focused on profits, not patient care. One technician complained about having to watch 72 heart monitors at once. Nurses complained that babies in the neonatal unit were left unattended for up to 3 hours. Despite the fraud and 2 of his executives going to jail, Scott, who resigned as chairman of a $10 million settlement and left with his $300 million worth of stock. Then, after getting rich off fraud and failure in healthcare, he somehow got elected governor of Florida and now boasts that he helped shape the GOP plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. Great. Just the kind of person you want involved. HCA was a private hospital, but non-profits have gotten in on the racket as well through conspiracy, price fixing and building so-called super monopolies. The tax-exempt University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is a giant of a hospital trying to get even bigger. UPMC controlled 55% of the market, has recorded $13 billion in revenue and over $500 million in operating profit. Quite the charity. Meanwhile, the region's main health insurer, Highmark, controlled between 60 to 80% of the market. As Stephen Brill documents in his fantastic book America's Bitter Pill, this mega hospital and health insurer was sued in a case that, quote, alleged an outright conspiracy between UPMC and Highmark to control healthcare prices in western Pennsylvania. According to the complaint, the hospital and insurer were colluding to eliminate competition and drive up prices, harming the patients they're supposed to care about. Brill writes, Highmark agreed to pay sharply increased prices to UPMC, which it would be able to do because it could raise premiums with no fear of competition. The court eventually forced both sides to settle the case. And guess how much the CEO of this tax-exempt non-profit hospital was making while trying to establish a regional monopoly? $4 million a year. Even regular doctors are in on the racket. In his memoir, Doctored, The Disillusionment of an American Physician, Sandeep Jauhar describes how doctors refer patients to each other and keep patients in hospital longer than necessary, risking the chance of picking up infections, just to make more money. While you're watching all the political point scoring in Washington next week over the Senate healthcare bill, just remember that it is all colossally beside the point unless those grandstanding politicians in the pockets of the health industry actually do something about healthcare costs. And that will only happen if we drain the health swamp. Next week, we'll conclude our series with a must-see segment on the health insurance companies. I can't wait to get stuck into them. Don't miss it. Next up, the panel reacts to this week's Swamp Watch. And can this burger revolutionize the way we eat? Kimberly and the panel put the impossible burger to the taste test. Don't miss it. Okay, now let's get our panel's take on this week's Swamp Watch. Joe, I want to come to you first. You're a free market guy.
Yeah.
We do not have free market healthcare in America, do we?
No, we don't. And it's because there is a big, big pot of federal and state money that's always out there, and people are going to get sick. And so if there's a big pot of federal money out there and hospitals want their reimbursements, guess what? They're going to set high prices. It's really, you sell watches and someone's going to buy a watch. I promise you I'll buy unlimited watches, but I just need a 50% discount.
Yeah, but
just double the price.
Do you think how can they get away with it? That's not okay. Surely.
Well, in some places there is competition. I mean, where I live in Northern California, there are 2 hospital systems. You can go to one, or you can go to the other. One, in fact, is cheaper. It's a self-contained, verticalized system, and it actually works a little bit better. And then you've got Stanford University's beautiful hospital, where a robot fetches the drugs for you.
No, let's get started on the robots. That's another show. You know what I mean?
During the robot swamp.
That's right, exactly. What do you make of all this?
Look, I mean, I think this is another really hot topic that people are talking about. Healthcare with a vote votes coming up, the intractability there. Republicans better get it together because people expect some. They've been whining about Obamacare and health care and the morass there for years. Now they have the House, they have the Congress, Senate, the Oval. Now they got to do something about it, because the problem is I think there's a real lack of competition. I'm a big free market person as well, and it really bothers me when I see these monopolies of hospitals, and it's just squeezing profits at the expense of quality of care for the patient. It's become so transactional in all the business and the bottom line that you're losing the ability to focus on the individual coming in and the family members and trying to get affordable care, to the point where people are afraid to even go in to get it because oh, I can't afford this, or it puts them so they're making choices, which makes us overall sicker as a nation if people aren't taking care of themselves.
You just put that so well, and what's interesting is that that's just not in the conversation about this bill, is it? We don't talk about the competition aspect. It's just not there. Lucy, what do you think?
Well, I'm a supporter of universal health care for all, single-payer expansion of Medicare, whatever that looks like. I think that in this country, to Kim's point, that when you start to put profits over people, profits over good health care, then that's always a recipe for disaster, and that's what we have seen. Ultimately, if you have, as mentioned in your Swamp Watch, when you have someone whose job description is to get the most amount of money, the most amount of profits for his investors, then that's what he's going to do at the expense of all of those people.
I want to make it clear. I really believe in the profit motive. I think it's a driving force for many of the good things we see in the world. But it only works if you've got competitive markets, if it's a fair system, and that's not what we have.
And I certainly believe that you can achieve that. People, of course, there should be payment of cost for the pharmaceutical companies, for the providers, et cetera, and that can be achieved under a single-payer system. But I think that we have to remove that profit motive out of this entire system. Whenever you put that into any system, you're going to end up.
No, then it's Venezuela. I'm Venezuela. Who wants to go there for medical care?
Look, we're the United States. We can figure this out. We have incredibly, and that's what our elected representatives are supposed to be doing for us, right? I mean, theoretically.
Supposed to.
But we're supposed to be very smart people. We can figure this out.
Yeah, well, look, I think this is a debate. Well, as we know, this is a debate that's going to go on and on. But I'm really pleased that we got a chance to talk about some of the aspects of it that you don't often see.
And so many places where we agree.
Yeah, exactly,
right?
exactly. Well, we'll do it again. We'll reunite and fix it next time. Thank you so much. Well, you have seen her food reviews on The Five. But how will Kimberly Guilfoyle rate a revolutionary new delicacy? Her verdict, next. Welcome back, everyone. We are so excited about what we're about to feast on here. Well, they are anyway. So our panel have in front of them an absolutely delicious item called the Impossible Burger. Why is it impossible? Because it looks like meat, tastes like meat, yes, even bleeds like meat, but it's actually made from plants. Plants! It's the brainchild of Silicon Valley's Impossible Foods, and their mission is really interesting. Basically, as the world gets richer, more and more people, there's some munching going on, very good. More and more people around the world are developing a taste for meat and the budget to pay for it. But that isn't just not sustainable. So, Impossible Foods' plan is to invent new choices for people around the world that satisfy their taste for delicious meat in a sustainable way, as well as opening up whole new business opportunities for our farmers. So, what is the verdict, Kimberly?
Oh my God. I give it a 10, and so does the Russian judge. It's delicious. So good.
What do you think?
It's a pretty serious burger, I have to say.
This is amazing. I can stay after, right?
No, because I had it, and we actually did a side-by-side taste test with a burger that was a traditional burger made of actual meat, and we definitely preferred this. I'm going to have mine after.
It's very juicy, Steve, so I suggest you wear a little bib of sorts. For
those of us who do care about and think about our impact on the environment, I mean, oh my gosh, this is so good. This is definitely amazing.